Wife's funeral box was outside. The cruel husband was enjoying a passionate night with his mistress inside. A sudden knock came at the door. "Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories for another thrilling and heartfelt tale. Heavenly Father, bless Mr. Peter Stories and his readers with your love and peace. Strengthen him to inspire hearts and uplift souls through his stories. Heal every broken heart and renew hope in those who gather here. Let this space always reflect your light and grace. In Jesus' name, amen." I have a question for you, my dear family. Are you truly enjoying my stories? I'll be honest, sometimes I feel a little disheartened when I see fewer responses on my videos. It makes me wonder if I'm reaching your hearts the way I hope to. So, I need to hear from you. Are my stories bringing you joy, inspiration, or even just a moment of peace? Also, I'd love to know what kind of stories you'd like to hear next. Share your thoughts, your ideas, and let me know how you felt about the last story. Your feedback means everything to me, and it helps me create stories that truly resonate with you. Now, let's dive into today's story and see where this journey takes us. The setting sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the August estate, its dying rays painting the marble floors in streaks of amber and gold. Marlo Bambi stood motionless, one manicured hand resting against the cool glass as she watched the gardeners finish their evening routines. Below, Rafferty directed the younger staff with practiced efficiency, his movements carrying the same quiet dignity that had first drawn her attention 3 years ago. The fading light caught the silver threading through his dark hair, a testament to the decade he'd spent tending these grounds. 7 years into her marriage to Prince August, Marlo had mastered the art of appearing perfectly content. Her wardrobe, curated by the city's most exclusive stylists, was worth more than most people's homes. The diamonds at her throat, a just-because gift from Prince last month, caught the fading light and scattered it like tears across the walls. Everything in her world was carefully selected, meticulously maintained, and absolutely hollow. The security cameras whirred softly in their housings, their red lights blinking in steady rhythm. Prince had installed the system 2 years ago, claiming it was for her protection. "My beautiful wife deserves to feel safe," he'd said, kissing her temple with lips that smiled but never quite warmed. Now 47 cameras monitored every corner of their lives, recording in high definition as their marriage crumbled behind closed doors. Her mind drifted back to their first meeting, 5 years before they married. She'd been fresh out of graduate school, her computer science degree still pristine in its frame. The charity gala had been drowning in wealth and influence, but Prince August had eyes only for her. She remembered how he'd approached her, champagne flutes in hand, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. "You look lost in thought," he'd said, offering her a glass. "In a room full of socialites discussing their latest shopping sprees, I spotted you analyzing the security system's blind spots." His observation had startled her. She had indeed been mentally mapping the camera's coverage areas, an old habit from her cybersecurity courses. That night, she'd been impressed by his intelligence, his apparent understanding. He'd listened intently as she explained her theories on integrated security systems, seeming genuinely fascinated. Now, years later, she wondered if he'd been studying her even then, learning her strengths to better guard against them. The east wing of the estate stretched out before her, like a kingdom in miniature. The tennis courts where she spent her Tuesday mornings with her trainer, Antonio, lay silent now, their pristine surfaces gleaming in the dusk light. Beyond them, the rose garden she'd designed herself bloomed in carefully planned succession, ensuring year-round color. The Olympic-sized pool reflected the darkening sky, its surface disturbed only by the gentle evening breeze. A helicopter's distinctive thrum grew louder, right on schedule, 6:45 p.m. Prince returning from another crucial business meeting that couldn't be conducted over video conference. She watched as the sleek black machine descended onto the helipad, its rotors stirring the carefully manicured lawn into temporary chaos. Her husband emerged, his tall frame unmistakable even at this distance. The sight of him once made her heart race. Now it made her pulse quicken for entirely different reasons. As he strode toward the house, Italian leather briefcase swinging casually at his side, Marlowe noticed something that would have escaped her younger, more naive self. His tie was slightly askew, and even from here she could tell it wasn't the same one he'd left wearing that morning. The detail catalogued itself automatically in her mental evidence file, joining hundreds of other small inconsistencies she'd observed over the past year. The house staff moved with practiced precision, preparing for the evening routine. Maria, the head housekeeper Prince had hired 6 months ago, directed her team with rigid efficiency. Gone were the warm, familiar faces that had served the household for years. In their place, a new crew of perfectly qualified strangers, each recommended by Prince's mysterious new consultant. Only Rafferty remained from the old guard, his position as groundskeeper seemingly secure. Perhaps Prince thought him too inconsequential to matter, or maybe he simply hadn't found a suitable replacement yet. Whatever the reason, Marlowe was secretly grateful. In a house full of unfamiliar faces, Rafferty's steady presence provided a strange comfort. The sound of footsteps in the hallway drew her attention. Prince's distinctive gait, the slight click of his left heel from an old polo injury. She didn't turn as he entered the room, maintaining her vigil at the window. His cologne reached her first, expensive and subtle, but underneath it lay another scent, one that made her stomach tighten. A floral perfume, definitely not her own. Still admiring the view, his voice carried that familiar blend of affection and condescension. The gardens looked particularly lovely this evening. Marlowe turned, her face a masterpiece of wifely devotion. Rafferty has outdone himself with the autumn plantings. She moved to kiss his cheek, noting how he subtly shifted to maintain distance. How was your meeting? Productive. Prince loosened his tie, the new one, she noted. Dark blue silk, replacing the grey one he'd worn that morning. The Maxwell merger is finally moving forward. He crossed to the bar cart, crystal decanter catching the last rays of sunlight. Drink? No, thank you. She watched him pour himself a generous measure of scotch, noting how his hand trembled slightly. I thought the Maxwell deal was postponed until next quarter. A barely perceptible pause in his movements. Plans change, darling. That's the nature of business. He took a long sip, then checked his phone. I'll be dining in my study tonight. The Asian markets are opening soon. Marlowe nodded, the perfect understanding wife. Of course, I'll have Maria send up a tray. She moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, the insurance adjuster called earlier. Something about updates to our policy? This time the pause was unmistakable. Just routine maintenance, Prince replied, his tone carefully neutral. Nothing for you to worry about. Later that evening, alone in her private suite, Marlowe sat at her desk, her laptop open to a secure email account Prince knew nothing about. Years of working in cybersecurity before her marriage had taught her the value of maintaining separate digital identities. The camera in the corner blinked its steady red light, but she knew its feed was currently showing a loop of her reading in bed, a small trick she'd implemented months ago. A soft knock at her door preceded Maria's entrance. Your evening tea, Mrs. August. The housekeeper's movements were precise as she arranged the delicate porcelain service. Will there be anything else? No, thank you, Maria. Marlowe waited until the door closed before reaching for the cup. She didn't drink it, hadn't touched any food or drink prepared by the new staff in weeks. Instead, she pulled up the security feeds on her laptop, watching as Prince paced in his study, phone pressed to his ear. Through the high-definition cameras, she could see his expression clearly, excitement poorly masked by attempted calm. He was speaking too softly for the audio to pick up, but she could read the tension in his shoulders, the nervous energy in his movements. A movement in the grounds caught her attention. Through the camera covering the service entrance, she watched an unfamiliar car slip away into the gathering darkness. The license plate was carefully angled away from the camera's view. Amateur work, really. Prince should have known better than to trust such details to others. Tomorrow would bring new evidence, new suspicions, new fears. But for now, Marlowe maintained her practiced smile, even alone in her room. After all, in this golden cage, even the walls had eyes. In his study, unaware of his wife's surveillance, Prince August made another call. "Everything's proceeding according to schedule," he murmured into the phone. "Soon, my love, we'll be free to start our new life." He paused, listening. "Yes, the insurance policy has been updated. No, she suspects nothing. Marlowe has always been content to let me handle the business side of things." Oh, how wrong he was. The security camera in the corner blinked its red eyes steadily, recording it all for future reference. In her room, Marlowe saved the footage to her. Encrypted cloud storage, another piece of evidence in the growing file that would eventually seal her husband's fate. Outside, the last traces of sunset faded from the sky, leaving the August estate in darkness. But in the shadows of this perfectly maintained world, something was stirring, a reckoning that would shake the very foundations of Prince August's carefully constructed empire. Chapter 2. Shadows of Truth. The first warning came not as a thunderclap, but as a whisper. Marlowe sat in her private study, reviewing the estate's security logs, a habit she'd maintained since her days as a cybersecurity expert, when an anomaly caught her attention. Someone had accessed the mansion's electrical systems remotely at 3:27 a.m., using Prince's administrative credentials. This wasn't unusual in itself. Prince often worked late. What caught her attention was the access location, the Ritz-Carlton downtown, where he'd claimed to be in negotiations with Chinese investors. But Marlowe had already noted his GPS location that night, at a private residence in Buckhead, registered to a K. Becker. "Computer, pull up all access logs for the past 6 months, she commanded, fingers flying across her custom keyboard. The mansion's security system, which Prince had installed claiming it was for her protection, now became her first tool of investigation. Multiple screens displayed data streams, security camera footage, access logs, GPS coordinates from Prince's vehicles. A pattern emerged. Regular visits to the Buckhead address, always on nights he claimed to be elsewhere. But it was the technical access that troubled her most. Someone was methodically studying the mansion's infrastructure. Her phone buzzed. A text from Prince. "Late meeting with Maxwell merger team. Don't wait up." Marlowe checked his location. The Buckhead residence again. She opened her secure laptop, the one Prince didn't know existed, and began creating an encrypted database. Every lie, every discrepancy, every suspicious access would be documented. The next morning brought another piece of the puzzle. During her usual garden walk, Rafferty approached with what appeared to be a routine maintenance question. "Mrs. August," he said carefully, "I noticed some unusual work orders for the East Wing electrical system. The contractors are requesting access to areas that seem unnecessary for standard maintenance." Marlowe studied the groundskeeper's weathered face. In 7 years, he'd never brought her maintenance concerns. His eyes held a warning she couldn't ignore. "Show me," she replied quietly. In the garden shed, converted into Rafferty's office, he revealed a stack of work orders. The contractors had been systematically modifying the mansion's electrical system, focusing particularly on the areas around her private wing and the pool house. "They're installing something that looks like modified circuit breakers," Rafferty explained, spreading out technical diagrams. But the specifications are wrong for standard equipment. These are designed to create power surges. Marlowe's cybersecurity training kicked in. She began cross-referencing the contractor's visits with Prince's financial records, which she'd been quietly monitoring. Each electrical modification corresponded with large payments through a series of shell companies. Back in her study, she initiated deep scans of Prince's communications. Her custom software, designed during her corporate security days, began intercepting his encrypted messages. What she found chilled her blood. "Everything proceeding according to plan," one email read. "Kay confirms insurance adjustments are in place. Timeline set for next month." Marlowe started building a secure digital war room. Multiple monitors tracked different aspects of her investigation. Screen 1, surveillance footage from cameras she'd secretly installed. Screen 2, financial transactions through Prince's hidden accounts. Screen 3, communications between Prince and his conspirators. Screen 4, technical modifications to the estate's systems. She discovered Prince had replaced almost all the long-term staff over the past 3 months. Only Rafferty remained, presumably considered too insignificant to matter. Each new hire had received substantial payments through offshore accounts. Late that night, while Prince was supposedly at a board meeting, Marlowe accessed the security feeds from his private study. There he sat with a striking woman, Kalina Becker, she now knew, reviewing documents spread across his desk. "The electrical modifications are key," Prince was saying, his voice clear through Marlowe's enhanced audio feed. "When the power surge hits the pool systems, it will look completely accidental. The insurance investigation won't find anything suspicious." Kalina's laugh carried a predatory note. "And your precious wife never misses her evening swim, does she?" Marlowe's hands remained steady as she downloaded and encrypted the conversation. Her mind raced through implications and options. Prince wasn't just having an affair, he was planning her murder. Over the next week, she expanded her investigation. Her technical skills, which Prince had dismissed as a hobby, now became her strongest weapon. She discovered modified circuit breakers designed to cause catastrophic failures. Insurance policies quietly tripled in value. New staff hired through shell companies with suspicious backgrounds. Regular payments to contractors specializing in accident reconstruction. Each discovery was meticulously documented and stored on secure servers Prince couldn't access. She began building a timeline. 3 months ago, Prince meets Kalina Becker. 2 months ago, first electrical modifications begin. 6 weeks ago, staff replacements start. 1 month ago, insurance policies adjusted. 2 weeks ago, final phase of modifications scheduled. During this time, she maintained her normal routine. She attended charity functions, supervised household staff, and took her regular evening swims. Every movement was calculated to maintain Prince's illusion of control. Rafferty proved an invaluable ally. His position as groundskeeper gave him access to areas Prince never considered important. He documented contractor visits, photographed modifications, and recorded conversations the workers thought no one could hear. The breakthrough came during a stormy night when Prince believed Marlowe was at a charity gala. Instead, she sat in her hidden command center, monitoring his meeting with the electrical contractors. "The system is designed to fail catastrophically," the lead contractor explained, pointing to detailed diagrams. "The power surge will hit the pool systems first, then trigger cascading failures throughout the east wing. The accelerants we've installed in the walls will ensure maximum damage." Prince's voice carried satisfaction. "And it will all look like a tragic accident. Poor Marlowe, victim of faulty wiring. The insurance investigation will find nothing suspicious." Marlowe watched her husband of 7 years plan her death with the same precision he used for hostile corporate takeovers. Each detail was documented, each contingency planned for. His only mistake was underestimating the wife he saw as merely decorative. She began constructing her counter-strategy. Every system Prince planned to use against her would become evidence of his crimes. His own surveillance network would document his conspiracy. His meticulous record-keeping would prove premeditation. As dawn approached, Marlowe reviewed her growing evidence file. Prince had created what he thought was the perfect murder plot. Instead, he had built a perfect case for his own destruction. In his study, unaware of being watched, Prince made another late-night call to Kalina. They discussed their future plans, the life they would build with Marlowe's insurance money. Their confidence would prove to be their downfall. The security cameras blinked silently, recording everything. Prince had installed them to control his wife. Now they would serve as witnesses to his own undoing. Chapter 3. The Paper Trail. The midnight silence of the August estate was broken only by the soft hum of computers in Marlowe's private study. 3 screens cast their blue glow across her face as she traced the web of her husband's deception. Each new discovery felt like another crack in the foundation of her marriage, revealing the rot beneath its perfect surface. "Found you," she whispered, as her tracking program highlighted a series of transfers. $5 million had moved through 4 different banks before landing in an account registered to KB Enterprises. Kalina Becker wasn't just Prince's mistress. She was a well-paid conspirator in Marlowe's planned murder. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her freeze. Through the security feed, she watched Prince walk past her door, phone pressed to his ear. His voice drifted through her enhanced audio system. "Everything's proceeding exactly as planned," he was saying. "The electrical modifications will be complete next week. After that, it's just a matter of timing." Marlowe's fingers flew across the keyboard, documenting every word. The man she'd married, who had once seemed so perfect, was now orchestrating her death with the same precision he used for business deals. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts, their agreed-upon signal. Rafferty entered, carrying a thick manila envelope. "The contractors left these in their truck," he said quietly. "You were right about the electrical work. These aren't normal repairs." Together, they spread the documents across her desk. Technical diagrams showed modifications to the mansion's electrical system, focusing particularly on the pool area where she took her evening swims. The specifications were damning, equipment designed to create catastrophic failures while appearing accidental. "He's been paying them through shell companies," Marlowe explained, pulling up financial records, each transaction hidden behind layers of legitimate-looking businesses. "But look here." She highlighted a series of payments. "Every time there's a transfer to the contractors, there's a corresponding increase in our insurance coverage." Rafferty studied the pattern. "The new staff, they're all being paid too, aren't they?" Marlowe nodded grimly. Opening another file, she revealed what she'd discovered about the recently hired servants. Maria, the head housekeeper, had a son with expensive medical needs that had mysteriously been met after she joined the household. James, the new security chief, had gambling debts that vanished shortly after his employment began. "Prince bought their loyalty," she said. "Each one chosen for their vulnerabilities, each one paid through untraceable accounts. Except you." Rafferty's weathered face showed a hint of pride. "He thought I was too insignificant to matter. Just the groundskeeper, not worth investigating deeply enough to discover my background in private security." The next hours were spent building their case. Every document was carefully scanned and encrypted, every conversation recorded, every transaction traced. Prince's own meticulous nature worked against him. He documented everything, creating a perfect record of his crimes. At 3 a.m., Marlowe's monitoring program flagged new activity. Prince was in his study, reviewing documents with Kalina via video call. Their conversation, captured by Marlowe's hidden systems, was chilling in its casualness. "The insurance policies are perfect," Kalina was saying. "3 separate companies, each increase looking completely legitimate. No one will question the payouts after the accident." Prince's smile carried the satisfied look of a man who thought he controlled everything. "The electrical modifications are designed to look like age-related failures. The fire will destroy any evidence, and I'll be safely at the charity gala when it happens." Marlowe watched her husband plan her death, her face illuminated by the screens showing his betrayal. 7 years of marriage reduced to cold calculations of profit and loss. The fortune she'd helped him build would finance his new life with Kalina after his wife's tragic accident, of course. Dawn was approaching as she compiled the last pieces of evidence. The paper trail Prince had created was extensive. Insurance policies quietly tripled in value, shell companies hiding millions in payments, staff members bought with carefully concealed bribes, technical specifications for equipment designed to kill, secret accounts prepared for his future with Kalina. Each discovery was carefully documented and stored in multiple secure locations. If anything happened to her, the evidence would ensure Prince's destruction. Through the window, she could see Rafferty beginning his morning routine in the gardens. To anyone watching, he was just the devoted groundskeeper, maintaining the estate's perfect appearance. No one would suspect he was gathering evidence with every circuit of the grounds, photographing the contractor's work, recording suspicious conversations. The security cameras blinked their red eyes steadily, recording everything. Prince had installed them to control his wife, never imagining she would use them to document his own crimes. His perfect murder plot was becoming perfect evidence, one file at a time. In his study, Prince made another call to Kalina, discussing their future plans. They talked about the life they would build with Marlowe's insurance money, never suspecting that every word was being recorded, every plan documented, every betrayal preserved as evidence. Marlowe allowed herself a small smile as she watched him through the cameras. He had created what he thought was the perfect crime, documented with his usual attention to detail. Instead, he had built a perfect case for his own destruction. The paper trail was complete. Now it was just a matter of timing. Chapter 4. The Perfect Crime. Prince August stood in his private office at midnight, the city lights twinkling below through bulletproof glass. His reflection showed a man at the peak of his power, tall, distinguished, and utterly ruthless. On his desk, the final pieces of his master plan lay spread out in meticulous detail. "Everything is in place," he spoke into his encrypted phone, voice rich with satisfaction. "The electrical modifications are complete, the insurance policies have been updated, and all the new staff members understand their roles." He paused, savoring the moment. "In just 48 hours, my darling Kalina, we'll be free to start our new life." Kalina Becker's sultry laugh filtered through the secure line. "And you're certain everything will look like an accident?" "We can't afford any loose ends, my love." Prince smiled, reviewing the documentation before him. The plan was a masterpiece of criminal engineering, each element carefully crafted to appear innocent in isolation, but lethal when combined. He'd spent millions ensuring every detail was perfect. "The electrical contractors modified the wiring exactly as specified," he explained, trailing his finger along the estate's blueprints. "When activated, it will trigger a cascade of electrical fires that will appear to start from natural causes. The special materials we had installed in the walls will ensure the blaze spreads rapidly, leaving minimal evidence." He moved to his private safe, entering a complex combination. Inside, stacks of documentation detailed the elaborate scheme. Insurance policies had been methodically adjusted over months, each change subtle enough to avoid suspicion. The new staff had been carefully selected, people with desperate needs that made them susceptible to bribes and blackmail. Maria, the head housekeeper, had proven particularly useful. Her son's expensive medical treatments made her loyalty easily purchasable. Under her supervision, the staff maintained detailed logs of Marlowe's routines, ensuring they knew exactly where she would be when the plan was executed. "The timing is crucial," Prince continued, reviewing his notes. "Marlowe takes her evening swim at precisely 8:45 p.m. The power surge will be triggered at 8:50 p.m. when she's in the pool. The electrical failure will affect the pool's lighting and heating systems first, disorienting her. By the time she realizes something's wrong, the main fires will have started." He'd selected the evening carefully. A major charity gala would provide him with an airtight alibi. He would be giving a speech in front of hundreds of witnesses when the tragedy occurred. The security footage would mysteriously fail due to the power surge, and any evidence would be destroyed in the intense heat of the accelerant-enhanced blaze. The new staff would testify to Marlowe's presence in the house, their statements collaborating the tragic accident narrative. Each had been paid handsomely through untraceable offshore accounts, with promises of more once the plan succeeded. "The insurance payout will be substantial," Prince noted, allowing himself a moment of pride. "The policy now covers triple the estate's value, with specific riders for electrical fires and accidental death. Everything has been documented properly. The increased coverage appears perfectly reasonable given recent property improvements." Kalina's voice carried a note of anticipation. "And afterwards, the funds will be transferred through our network of shell companies," Prince explained. "By the time the insurance company completes their routine investigation, the money will be untraceable. We'll have everything we need to start fresh." He moved to the window, gazing out at his empire. The august name carried weight in this city, opened doors that remained closed to others. His marriage to Marlowe had been strategic, her family's old money connections useful in establishing his legitimacy. But now she had become an obstacle to his happiness, her very existence a barrier to the life he wanted with Kalina. The divorce option had been considered and discarded. Marlowe's prenuptial agreement entitled her to 50% of everything, a figure that had grown astronomical with his recent successes. No, an accident was the only clean solution. "The contractors," Kalina asked, ever attentive to details. "Have been handled," Prince assured her. "The company that did the electrical work exists only on paper. After the job, they were paid through one of our shell corporations. The workers themselves were hired through temporary agencies. No permanent records, no traceable connections." He returned to his desk, reviewing the staff schedules one final time. Everyone was positioned perfectly. The security team would be changing shifts, creating a brief gap in surveillance. The maintenance crew would be occupied with preparations for an upcoming garden party, and Marlowe, creatures of habit that she was, would be taking her usual evening swim. "There's only one minor concern," Prince admitted, frowning slightly. "That groundskeeper, Rafferty. He's been here too long. Might notice something unusual about the electrical work. Why wasn't he replaced with the others? Marlowe's oddly attached to him. Replacing him might have made her suspicious. Besides, he's just the gardener. What could he possibly notice that would matter?" The conversation continued for another hour, reviewing every aspect of the plan. Prince had orchestrated corporate takeovers worth billions, but this was his masterpiece. Every detail had been considered, every contingency planned for, the perfect crime. As midnight approached, Prince prepared for bed, his mind already racing with plans for his new life. The guest house where he occasionally entertained Kalina would become their permanent home while the new estate was built. Their future stretched before them, bright with promise and possibility. In 48 hours, Marlowe's tragic accident would free him. The grieving widower would receive sympathy instead of suspicion, his performance at the charity gala providing an unshakable alibi. After an appropriate mourning period, he would find comfort in Kalina's arms, their relationship developing naturally in the public eye. The security cameras blinked silently, recording his movements as he prepared for bed. In his arrogance, Prince never thought to question whether the systems he'd installed might be turned against him. He never considered that his perfect crime might have already been discovered, its every detail documented by the very woman he planned to eliminate. As sleep claimed him, Prince August smiled, dreaming of freedom. In his mind, he could already see the headlines: tragic accident claims socialite's life. His performance as the devastated husband would be perfect, every tear carefully calculated to enhance his image as a sympathetic victim of circumstance. The perfect crime, the perfect escape, the perfect future. But perfection, as Prince August would soon discover, was a dangerous illusion. Chapter 5. Survival. The morning of what would become known as Zero Day began at precisely 4:30 a.m. when Marlowe's encrypted phone buzzed with a message from Rafferty. Final contractor arrived early, installing last components in East Wing. From her private suite, Marlowe activated the surveillance program she'd secretly installed months ago. Multiple screens showed different areas of the estate. Contractors working on the electrical systems, Maria supervising the morning staff briefing, and most importantly, Prince in his study, making his final preparations for the gala that would serve as his alibi. Her own preparations had begun 3 months earlier when she first discovered the tunnel system beneath the estate. Dating back to Prohibition, the passages had been sealed but not destroyed. While Prince focused on installing his surveillance system above ground, Marlowe and Rafferty had quietly restored the underground escape route. "Time check," she messaged Rafferty. "All systems in place?" His response came instantly. "Thermal sensors installed. Decoy readings ready. Medical-grade cadaver obtained from contact at University Research Department. DNA modifications complete." The cadaver had been their most brilliant solution. Through careful manipulation and the application of specific genetic markers, they had created remains that would appear to be hers, even under forensic examination. The fire's intense heat would do the rest, destroying any potential contradictory evidence. At 7 a.m., Marlowe began her normal routine, knowing every movement was being watched and reported. She took breakfast in the sunroom, attended her usual yoga session, and reviewed charity documents, all while her hidden programs recorded the contractor's final modifications to the electrical system. Security feed loop test successful, her system reported at 2:15 p.m. The program would replace live footage with pre-recorded segments during crucial moments, showing her following her normal routine while she actually made her escape. Prince called at 4:45 p.m., his voice carrying practiced concern. "Darling, the charity gala needs my attention. I won't be home for dinner." "Of course, dear," she replied, noting how his voice betrayed subtle excitement. "Will you be late?" "I'm giving the keynote speech at 9 p.m. Don't wait up." The call ended, and Marlowe checked another item off her mental checklist. Prince was following his own script perfectly, establishing his alibi just as she'd predicted. At 6 p.m., she began implementing the technical aspects of their counterplan. Her evening swim was scheduled for 8:45 p.m., with Prince's planned power surge set for 8:50 p.m. The new staff had been instructed to verify her presence in the pool area, then conveniently look away when the first electrical problems began. "Package 0 secure," Rafferty confirmed at 7:30 p.m. In the renovated tunnel, their escape vehicle waited, fully stocked with supplies and new identities if needed. More importantly, multiple waterproof servers contained copies of all their evidence, ready to be activated if anything went wrong. The most delicate part of their plan involved the security systems. Marlowe had spent weeks creating a sophisticated cascade of failures that would appear to be caused by the fire, but would actually follow her precisely programmed sequence. At 8 p.m., she received confirmation that Prince had arrived at the gala. Society photographers captured his entrance, documenting his careful performance as a devoted husband attending another routine social event. Final positions, she messaged Rafferty at 8:30 p.m. Everything they'd prepared was in place: the modified cadaver in its hidden location, the security camera loops ready to activate, and the escape route cleared. The next 15 minutes passed with excruciating slowness. Marlowe changed into her swimsuit, making sure the cameras caught her typical pre-swim routine. Underneath, she wore a specially designed tactical suit, thin enough to be invisible but offering protection against heat and smoke. At 8:45 p.m., she dove into the pool. The cameras recorded her smooth strokes, the picture of an unsuspecting victim. Below the surface, she activated the waterproof transmitter that would trigger their sequence of events. 8:47 p.m. The first phase activated. Security footage began its carefully choreographed dance of real and pre-recorded segments. In the pool's pump room, automated systems prepared to create the exact water conditions that would support their story. 8:49 p.m. Marlowe pulled herself from the pool, disappearing into the blind spot they'd created. The modified cadaver, previously hidden in a service panel, was moved into position by automated systems Rafferty had installed under the guise of pool maintenance. The power surge hit at exactly 8:50 p.m. The estate's lights flickered and died as planned. Emergency systems activated, casting eerie shadows through the growing smoke. The specialized accelerants Prince had installed began their work, spreading flames with unnatural speed. But Marlowe was already gone, moving through their prepared tunnel. The passage had been equipped with its own ventilation system and fireproof barriers, protecting her from the inferno above. Behind her, the fire consumed the estate exactly as Prince had planned. The electrical systems failed in sequence, the pool area becoming a death trap for anyone unfortunate enough to be swimming there. The modified cadaver, positioned perfectly, would provide the DNA evidence that would convince investigators of her death. At 9 p.m., Prince began his keynote speech, his alibi witnessed by hundreds of Atlanta's elite. He spoke about charity and community service, playing the role of philanthropist while his wife supposedly burned to death in their home. 9:15 p.m. Emergency services received the alert. Fire trucks raced toward the August estate, their sirens providing cover for Marlowe's final extraction. She moved through the tunnel system, emerging half a mile away where Rafferty waited with their escape vehicle. The fire raged for hours, the accelerants ensuring maximum destruction. Prince's contractors had done their job well, perhaps too well. The intensity of the blaze would later raise questions among investigators, questions that would prove crucial to their case. At midnight, Prince returned home to find emergency vehicles surrounding his estate. His performance was perfect. The shocked husband, the desperate search for his wife, the collapse into grief when told the pool area was completely destroyed. But in a secure location miles away, Marlowe watched through encrypted feeds as her husband's plan unfolded. The cameras she'd installed in his private study captured his late-night call to Kalina, their celebration of success mixed with false solemnity about the tragic accident. The next phase would begin soon. The insurance investigation, the police reports, the carefully orchestrated show of mourning. Prince thought he had orchestrated the perfect crime, eliminating his wife while securing his fortune and freedom. The funeral box that would appear on his lawn would be his first indication of how completely his plan had failed. Chapter 6. The Celebration. 2 days after the fire that supposedly claimed his wife's life, Prince August pulled into the circular driveway of his secondary estate. The sleek Bentley's headlights swept across an unexpected sight. A polished mahogany funeral casket placed precisely in the center of his manicured lawn. He stared at it for a long moment, satisfaction warring with carefully manufactured grief. "Sir," his driver said softly, "shall I call someone to have it moved inside?" Prince waved him away, maintaining his facade of the devastated husband. "No, Thomas, you may go. I need a moment alone." He watched the car disappear down the long driveway before allowing himself a small smile. Everything had gone perfectly according to plan. The evening air was thick with the scent of jasmine as he approached the casket. A member of his household staff, one of the many new employees he'd carefully selected, appeared at his side like a shadow. "Mr. August, sir," the man said solemnly, "the remains were too badly burned for viewing. The medical examiner recommended immediate sealing of the casket." Prince nodded, his expression appropriately somber. "Of course, please have it moved to the chapel for tomorrow's private service." He paused, playing his role perfectly. "And James, send up a bottle of the Macallan 25. It's been a difficult day." Inside his private study, Prince loosened his tie and poured himself a generous measure of the aged Scotch. The past 48 hours had been a masterclass in performance. He'd played the grieving widower flawlessly, breaking down at appropriate moments, maintaining dignified silence when pressed by reporters, and presenting the perfect image of a man shattered by unexpected tragedy. His phone buzzed with an incoming text from Kalina. "Are we still on for tonight?" Prince smiled, typing back a quick confirmation. The investigation was proceeding exactly as he'd orchestrated. The fire's origin had been traced to an electrical malfunction in the pool area's systems, tragic but not suspicious. The insurance adjusters had already begun their routine review, finding everything meticulously documented and in order. The doorbell chimed at precisely 9 p.m. Kalina Becker swept in, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her perfume, expensive but subtle, filled the room as she moved to kiss him. "Darling," she purred, "you've been absolutely brilliant. Your performance at the memorial service this morning was Oscar-worthy." Prince allowed himself to relax fully for the first time in days. The plan worked perfectly. The accelerants ensured maximum destruction, just as our contractors promised. There's nothing left for investigators to find. They moved to the private dining room, where staff had prepared an intimate celebration dinner. Crystal glasses sparkled under soft lighting, filled with champagne that cost more than most cars. The table settings were immaculate. Marlowe had always insisted on maintaining certain standards, even in their secondary residences. "To new beginnings," Kalina raised her glass, red lips curved in a predatory smile. "And to your brilliant planning, my love." Prince touched his glass to hers, savoring both the moment and the expensive champagne. "The insurance payout will be processed within weeks. I've already set up the transfers through our shell companies. By the time anyone could think to look deeper, the money will be untraceable." They dined on Wagyu beef and truffle risotto, discussing their future plans with increasing animation as the wine flowed freely. Prince detailed the new estate he planned to build for them, far from the city's prying eyes. Kalina described the yacht she'd been researching, a fitting purchase for their new life together. "The timing has to be perfect," Prince mused, pouring another glass of champagne. "We'll need to wait an appropriate period before being seen together publicly. Perhaps a chance meeting at a charity event in a few months." Kalina laughed, the sound rich with anticipation. "The grieving widower finds unexpected comfort with a business associate. How scandalously appropriate." By midnight they had moved to the library, where Prince was enjoying an aged cognac while Kalina draped herself elegantly across a leather chaise. The room's wood paneling and leather-bound books created an atmosphere of old money and power, an image Prince had carefully cultivated throughout his rise to prominence. "Tell me again about the moment you knew the plan had worked." Kalina requested, her voice slightly slurred from celebration. "When did you know we'd succeeded?" Prince smiled, loosening his tie completely. When the fire chief confirmed the intensity of the blaze in the pool area, the accelerants worked exactly as designed, hot enough to destroy any evidence, but appearing consistent with an electrical fire. The security footage showing Marlowe's regular swim routine provided the perfect explanation for her presence there. They laughed together, the sound echoing through the book-lined room. Prince had just risen to pour another drink when a sharp knock at the door interrupted their celebration. Who could that be at this hour? Kalina frowned, straightening her dress. Prince checked his watch, frowning. Probably the catering service. I ordered a special midnight dessert course. He moved to open the door, his steps slightly unsteady from the evening's indulgences. The sight that greeted him caused the crystal glass to slip from his suddenly nerveless fingers, shattering on the imported marble floor. Standing in the doorway, very much alive and flanked by stern-faced federal agents, was Marlowe Bambi August. "Hello, darling," she said, her voice carrying a steel edge he'd never heard before. "Did you miss me?" Behind him, he heard Kalina's sharp intake of breath, followed by the distinctive sound of someone being sick. His perfect plan, his flawless execution, his carefully constructed future. All of it crumbled in the face of his wife's impossible resurrection. The federal agents moved past Marlowe, their badges glinting under the library's elegant lighting. "Prince August, you're under arrest for attempted murder, insurance fraud and conspiracy." The words washed over him as he stared at his wife, his alcohol-addled mind struggling to comprehend how completely his plan had failed. In his shock, he didn't notice one of the agents photographing the scene, an image that would soon be splashed across every newspaper in the country. The sound of handcuffs clicking closed finally broke through his stupor. As the agents led him away, he caught a glimpse of Rafferty standing quietly in the background, the groundskeeper's presence adding a final, devastating piece to the puzzle of his downfall. In the library, Marlowe watched as federal agents collected evidence from Prince and Kalina's celebration. Empty champagne bottles, scattered papers, and most damningly, a laptop containing detailed records of their plan. The security cameras she'd secretly installed captured everything, adding to the mountain of evidence she'd accumulated. Prince's perfect crime had become his perfect downfall, and the celebration of his success had become the beginning of his destruction. Chapter 7. Rising from the Ashes. The moment Marlowe appeared in the doorway of Prince's private study became immortalized in a photograph that would grace every major newspaper in the country. The image captured everything: Prince's champagne glass shattering on imported marble, Kalina Becker's mascara-streaked face, frozen in horror, and Marlowe, alive, powerful, flanked by federal agents in tactical gear. "Hello, darling." Marlowe's voice cut through the champagne-soaked celebration like a blade. "Did you miss me?" The federal agents moved with practiced precision, securing the room while Prince stood paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Behind him, Kalina stumbled backward, knocking over an expensive vase in her panic. "Prince August," FBI Special Agent Rivera announced, stepping forward with handcuffs glinting in the study's elegant lighting. "You're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and insurance fraud." The next hours unfolded like a perfectly choreographed dance of justice. Evidence response teams swarmed the secondary estate, documenting everything. In Prince's study, they found laptops still open to offshore banking sites, champagne bottles that would prove his celebration of her supposed death, and most damningly, a draft of the press statement he'd prepared about his wife's tragic accident. Meanwhile, in the estate's security room, cybercrime specialists worked with Marlowe's programs to download evidence from every hidden camera and microphone she'd installed. The footage was damning, Prince and Kalina discussing the murder plot, meetings with contractors about the electrical modifications, conversations about insurance policies and alibis. "Mrs. August," Agent Rivera said, reviewing the evidence streaming across multiple screens, "this is the most comprehensive documentation of premeditated murder I've ever seen. You didn't just survive, you built an ironclad case." In the main foyer, Prince sat, handcuffed and shell-shocked, as federal agents photographed and catalogued evidence. His expensive suit, usually immaculate, was stained with spilled champagne. The facade of the grieving widower had shattered completely, replaced by the trapped look of a predator caught in his own snare. Kalina Becker, separated from Prince and held in a different room, had already begun trying to save herself. "It was all his idea," she sobbed to the federal agents. "He planned everything. I just went along because I was afraid of him." Evidence teams found Prince's detailed murder plans in a hidden safe, documentation he'd kept out of arrogance, never imagining it would be discovered. The safe also contained offshore account information, fake passports, and a manuscript he'd started writing about his tragic loss and journey through grief. At 3 a.m., FBI forensics experts arrived at the burned estate, armed with Marlowe's detailed maps of the electrical modifications. What Prince had intended to look like a tragic accident now became a blueprint of premeditated murder. "The accelerant patterns match exactly with Mrs. August's documentation," the lead forensics investigator reported. "The electrical system was modified specifically to create an uncontrollable fire while appearing accidental. This level of planning shows clear intent." By dawn, the full scope of Prince's crimes began to emerge. Financial crimes units discovered millions hidden in shell companies. Insurance fraud investigators uncovered the carefully staged policy adjustments. Each piece of evidence had been meticulously documented by Marlowe during her months of preparation. The media frenzy erupted as the sun rose. News helicopters circled the estate while reporters crowded the gates, broadcasting live updates about the wealthy man who had failed to murder his wife. The story had everything: wealth, betrayal, attempted murder, and a brilliant woman who had turned the tables on her would-be killer. Inside the federal building, Prince's initial interrogation revealed a man whose perfectly controlled world had imploded. "She was supposed to be swimming," he kept muttering. "The security cameras showed her swimming. How could she? Marlowe watched his breakdown through one-way glass, Rafferty standing supportively at her side. "He never understood," she said quietly. "All those cameras, all that surveillance. He never thought someone else might be watching him." The evidence processing continued throughout the day. Computer forensics teams recovered deleted emails discussing the murder plot. Financial analysts tracked money movements that proved premeditation. Each discovery added another charge to the growing list of Prince's crimes. By evening, the full impact of Marlowe's counter-operation became clear. She hadn't just survived. She had documented every step of Prince's criminal conspiracy. His own obsession with control had made him keep records of everything, creating a paper trail that would now destroy him. In the federal prosecutor's office, Victoria Chen reviewed the mountain of evidence with growing satisfaction. "Mrs. August," she said, "you've given us everything we need for a conviction. This might be the most thoroughly documented attempted murder case in history." The day ended with Prince being transferred to federal detention, his requests for bail already denied based on flight risk. Through the prison transport's windows, he watched his perfect world crumble. His empire, built on power and control, was being dismantled piece by piece. Marlowe's reappearance hadn't just ruined his murder plot. It had exposed every criminal act he'd committed while building his fortune. Federal investigators were already uncovering evidence of tax fraud, money laundering, and corporate crimes stretching back years. In her secure hotel suite, Marlowe reviewed the day's developments with her legal team. The photographs of Prince's arrest had already gone viral, his shocked face becoming a symbol of justice served. His celebration of her supposed death had become the beginning of his own destruction. "Tomorrow," Victoria Chen explained, "we'll begin processing the evidence for trial. Your documentation gives us everything we need to show premeditation, intent, and consciousness of guilt." The security cameras in the hotel suite blinked silently, now serving to protect rather than control. Through their lenses, they captured the image of a woman who had risen from the ashes of betrayal, transforming her husband's weapons into tools of justice. Prince spent his first night in federal detention staring at the ceiling, his mind unable to grasp how completely his perfect plan had failed. In his arrogance, he had never considered that his quiet, decorative wife might be smarter, more resourceful, and infinitely more dangerous than he had imagined. Chapter 8. Justice Served. The federal courthouse loomed against the morning sky, its marble steps already crowded with reporters and spectators. Inside courtroom 3A, sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting dramatic shadows across the polished wood and leather as the bailiff's voice rang out, "All rise! The United States District Court is now in session, the Honorable Eleanor Martinez presiding." Marlowe sat at the prosecution table, elegant in a tailored navy suit that radiated quiet confidence. Beside her, lead prosecutor Victoria Chen arranged documents with practiced precision. Across the aisle, Prince August's $1,000 per hour defense team filled the opposition table, their client conspicuously absent. The courtroom doors opened. Every head turned as federal marshals led Prince in, his designer suit hanging loose after weeks in detention. His eyes met Marlowe's briefly before darting away, unable to hold her steady gaze. Judge Martinez's voice cut through the tension. "Are both sides ready to proceed?" Victoria Chen rose smoothly. "Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution is ready." What followed was a masterclass in justice. Chen's opening statement painted a picture of calculated evil, her words bringing Prince's crimes into sharp focus. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "this case is about a man who thought his wealth put him above the law, a man who plotted to murder his wife rather than share the fortune she helped him build." The evidence unfolded like scenes from a thriller. First came the financial experts, documenting Prince's elaborate money trails. Forensic accountants traced millions through offshore accounts, each transaction building a picture of premeditation. Mr. August began moving assets approximately 8 months before the attempted murder, testified FBI financial analyst Sarah Rodriguez. On the courtroom screens, complex financial charts showed the movement of millions through seemingly legitimate businesses. The technical evidence proved even more damning. Electrical engineers explained how the mansion's wiring had been deliberately modified to create the perfect conditions for an accidental fire. Computer forensics experts detailed how Prince's own security systems had recorded his conspiracy, but the human element struck hardest. Maria, the former head housekeeper, took the stand trembling. "Mr. August knew about my son's medical conditions," she testified, dabbing at her eyes. "He promised to pay for the treatments, but only if I followed his instructions exactly. He made me document Mrs. August's routines, report her movements." Throughout the morning, Prince maintained his composed facade. But when Kalina Becker took the stand, his control began to crack. His former mistress, striking in a conservative grey dress, avoided looking at him as she detailed their conspiracy. "It was Prince's idea from the beginning," she stated clearly. "He said divorce wasn't an option. The prenuptial agreement would cost him too much. He spent months planning every detail, making sure it would look like an accident." The prosecution displayed emails, text messages, and recorded conversations between Prince and Kalina. Their casual discussion of murder, hidden behind coded language about property renovations and insurance updates, drew audible gasps from the jury. Prince's facade finally shattered during Kalina's testimony about their celebration on the night of the supposed murder. He stood suddenly, his voice cracking. "You promised you'd never betray me." Judge Martinez's gavel cracked like a gunshot. "Order, Mr. August, control yourself or you will be removed from this courtroom." The day's final witness was Rafferty. The groundskeeper's quiet dignity provided a sharp contrast to the parade of corrupted staff members. He testified about discovering the electrical modifications, about helping Marlowe document the conspiracy. "Mrs. August is alive today because she was smarter than they expected," Rafferty concluded, his steady gaze meeting Prince's. Mr. August saw her as a trophy wife, never realizing she was actually a brilliant strategist. Victoria Chen's closing argument was devastating in its simplicity. "The defendant created what he thought was the perfect crime," she told the jury. "But his own meticulous nature, his need to document and control everything, created the very evidence that will now convict him." As the jury filed out for deliberations, Prince sat slumped at the defense table, his empire crumbling around him. The chess master had been checkmated by the queen he'd underestimated. Justice was about to be served. Chapter 9. The Fall Prince. August's breakdown in court became the defining moment of what the media had dubbed the resurrection trial. It began during the prosecution's final week of evidence presentation, as the weight of his crumbling empire finally proved too much to bear. The morning started routinely enough. Federal marshals led Prince into courtroom 3A, where Judge Eleanor Martinez presided over the proceedings with her characteristic stern efficiency. The prosecution had saved their most devastating evidence for these final days, systematically dismantling every aspect of Prince's carefully constructed defense. Victoria Chen stood before the jury, her professional demeanor masking the satisfaction of a prosecutor who knew victory was within grasp. The prosecution calls Dr. Nathan Harrison, forensic psychologist. Prince's head snapped up at the announcement. His attorney, Maxwell Sterling, immediately objected. "Your Honor, we weren't notified of this witness." "The witness was added to the list last night," Chen responded smoothly, "after Mr. August's incident in the detention center." The incident in question had occurred just 12 hours earlier. Prison cameras had captured Prince in his cell, talking to himself, rehearsing conversations with Kalina as if she hadn't betrayed him. The footage, now entered into evidence, showed the first cracks in his carefully maintained facade. Dr. Harrison took the stand, his academic credentials impeccable. "I was asked to review Mr. August's behavior patterns both before and after his arrest," he testified. "The evidence shows a clear pattern of narcissistic personality disorder combined with an almost pathological need for control." The courtroom screens displayed video compilations, Prince micromanaging his staff, installing surveillance systems, documenting every aspect of his life and others. What he had seen as strength, the expert revealed as weakness, a desperate need to control everything and everyone around him. "The defendant's reaction to losing control is particularly telling," Dr. Harrison continued. "When faced with the possibility of divorce, he didn't simply seek legal counsel. Instead, he spent months orchestrating an elaborate murder plot, unable to accept any outcome he couldn't completely control." Prince's hands began to shake as the psychologist methodically deconstructed his personality. Every trait he'd considered a strength, his attention to detail, his meticulous planning, his need for perfection, was revealed as part of his pathology. The breaking point came when the prosecution played the synchronized footage from the night of the attempted murder. Multiple screens showed different angles. Prince giving his alibi speech at the charity gala, the fire consuming the estate, and most damningly his drunken celebration with Kalina when he thought he'd succeeded. "Objection!" Sterling shouted, but Prince was already on his feet. "You don't understand," he screamed, his composed mask shattering completely. "I had to do it. She would have taken everything. Do you know how hard I worked to build my empire? I couldn't let her destroy it all." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Journalists scribbled frantically. Sketch artists captured Prince's contorted features, and the jury watched in stunned silence as the defendant continued his meltdown. "It was perfect," Prince ranted, shrugging off his attorney's attempts to silence him. "Every detail was perfect. The electrical modifications, the insurance policies, the staff coordination. I thought of everything. Everything except—" His voice broke as he stared at Marlowe, who met his gaze with calm dignity. "Except you weren't supposed to be smart enough to stop me." Judge Martinez's gavel cracked like gunfire. "Marshals, remove the defendant. Jury will disregard this outburst." But the damage was done. Prince's public confession, caught on multiple cameras and witnessed by a packed courtroom, would soon be splashed across every newspaper in the country. The carefully crafted image of the grieving widower had been replaced by the reality of a man consumed by his own hubris. In the holding cell during the court's recess, Prince's breakdown continued. Security cameras recorded his devastating realization that everything was lost. His empire, his reputation, his freedom, all destroyed by his own actions and the wife he'd fatally underestimated. When court resumed, Sterling attempted damage control. "Your Honor, my client is clearly under extreme stress. We request a psychiatric evaluation and a delay in proceedings." Victoria Chen rose smoothly. "The prosecution has no objection to a psychiatric evaluation, but we believe Mr. August's outburst simply revealed his true nature. The same controlling personality that led him to document every aspect of his crime has now provided us with a public confession." The afternoon brought more devastating testimony. Financial experts detailed how Prince's empire had begun crumbling even before his arrest. His obsession with controlling every detail of the murder plot had led to mistakes in his business dealings. Companies were pulling contracts, partners were distancing themselves, and his carefully built reputation was in tatters. The defendant's companies have lost over 60% of their value since his arrest, testified corporate analyst Michael Zhang. His board members are resigning, clients are canceling contracts, and regulatory agencies have opened multiple investigations into his business practices. Prince sat slumped at the defense table, his earlier energy replaced by defeated lethargy. He watched as years of careful image building were systematically destroyed. Each witness added another piece to the picture of a man undone by his own obsession with control. The media coverage was relentless. News channels played Prince's courtroom breakdown on continuous loop. Body language experts analyzed his confession, psychologists debated his mental state, and social media erupted with millions of reactions to his public unraveling. In her secure location, Marlowe watched the coverage with Rafferty by her side. "He really never understood," she mused quietly. "All those surveillance systems, all that monitoring, and he never once considered that someone else might be watching him." The day ended with Prince being led back to his cell, his designer suit wrinkled, his carefully groomed appearance in disarray. The cameras caught every moment of his defeat. The slumped shoulders, the unsteady steps, the hollow eyes of a man watching his world collapse. In the prosecution's office, Victoria Chen reviewed the day's transcripts with her team. "His breakdown actually simplified our job," she noted. "The jury won't need much convincing after that display." Outside the courthouse, reporters continued their vigil, broadcasting updates to a public hungry for details of the wealthy man's spectacular fall. The story had everything: wealth, betrayal, attempted murder, and now a public breakdown that revealed the darkness beneath the polished surface. Prince spent the night in his cell, all pretense of dignity abandoned. The security cameras recorded his conversations with ghosts, arguing with Galena, trying to explain his actions to an invisible audience, repeatedly mumbling about how perfect his plan had been. The fall of Prince August was complete. The man who had tried to orchestrate the perfect crime had instead orchestrated his own perfect destruction. His empire was crumbling, his reputation destroyed, and his freedom soon to be forfeit. All that remained was the formal verdict and sentencing. In the end, his greatest enemy hadn't been Marlowe, or the prosecutors, or even the evidence he'd so meticulously created. Prince August had been destroyed by the very traits he'd considered his strengths: his need for control, his obsession with documentation, and his fatal underestimation of the wife he'd tried to kill. Chapter 10. Retribution. The sentencing hearing dawned cold and clear, the federal courthouse steps already crowded with reporters by 6 a.m. Inside courtroom 3A, heightened security reflected the intense public interest in what the media had dubbed the sentencing of the century. Marlowe sat in the front row, her posture perfect, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that projected strength rather than victimhood. Beside her, Rafferty provided his steady, quiet presence. The past weeks had seen Prince's complete unraveling during the trial, his public breakdown becoming viral footage that had captivated the nation. At precisely 9 a.m., the court clerk's voice rang out. "All rise. The United States District Court for the Northern District is now in session. The Honorable Judge Eleanor Martinez presiding." Judge Martinez took her seat, her stern features giving nothing away. The rustling of papers and adjusting of microphones filled the tense silence as the proceedings began. "Bring in the defendant," she ordered. Prince August shuffled into the courtroom, the chains around his ankles creating a metallic symphony of defeat. Gone was the powerful man who had once commanded an empire. His prison-issued jumpsuit hung loose on his frame, and dark circles under his eyes testified to sleepless nights spent watching his world crumble. "Before we proceed with sentencing," Judge Martinez began, "the court will hear victim impact statements. Mrs. August, you may approach." Marlowe rose gracefully, moving to the podium with measured steps. Her voice, when it came, carried clearly through the hushed courtroom. "Your Honor, I stand before you not just as a victim, but as a survivor. Prince August didn't just attempt to murder me. He tried to erase me completely. He saw me as property to be disposed of when it became inconvenient, never considering that I might be capable of outsmarting him." She continued, detailing the psychological impact of discovering her husband's betrayal. The months spent gathering evidence while pretending ignorance, the constant fear that one wrong move would expose her counterplans. "The man I married was an illusion," she concluded. "Behind the polished exterior was someone capable of planning my murder with the same attention to detail he gave to business acquisitions. He spent millions orchestrating what he thought was the perfect crime, all to avoid sharing the fortune we had built together." Next came statements from the staff members Prince had corrupted. Maria, the former housekeeper, tearfully described how he had exploited her son's medical conditions to ensure her cooperation. Others followed, each telling similar stories of manipulation and coercion. Kalina Becker, appearing via video link from her own detention facility, provided the final statement. Her testimony, part of her plea agreement, laid bare the cold calculation behind their plan. "Prince assured me everything was perfect," she stated, avoiding looking at her former lover. "He talked about the murder like it was just another business deal to be closed. The night we thought we'd succeeded, when we were celebrating with champagne, he actually proposed a toast to the perfect crime." When it came time for Prince to address the court, he rose unsteadily. His previous breakdown had stripped away any pretense of dignity, leaving only bitter truth. "I built an empire," he began, his voice hoarse. "Everything I touched turned to gold. I couldn't let her take half of it. I couldn't." He trailed off. staring at Marlowe with a mixture of hatred and bewildered respect. "You weren't supposed to be smart enough. You were just supposed to be beautiful and decorative. That's all I wanted." Judge Martinez cut him off. "Mr. August, if you have nothing productive to add, you may be seated." The prosecution's sentencing recommendation was severe. Victoria Chen stood, her presentation methodical and damning. "Your Honor, the evidence presented at trial showed not just attempted murder, but a level of premeditation rarely seen in criminal cases. Mr. August spent months and millions of dollars planning what he believed would be the perfect crime. He corrupted his staff, created elaborate financial schemes, and showed zero remorse until his plan failed." She detailed the multiple charges: attempted first-degree murder, conspiracy, insurance fraud, money laundering, witness tampering, and dozens of financial crimes. Each charge was supported by mountains of evidence, much of it created by Prince's own obsessive documentation. "The defendant's actions deserve the maximum sentence," Chen concluded. "He has shown himself to be a danger to society. Someone who views murder as simply another business strategy." Judge Martinez listened to the defense's arguments for leniency with obvious skepticism. Maxwell Sterling tried to paint his client as a successful businessman who had suffered a mental break, but the evidence of long-term planning made such claims ring hollow. At last, the moment of sentencing arrived. Judge Martinez's voice cut through the tense courtroom like a blade. "Prince August, you stand before this court having been convicted of crimes that shock the conscience. You spent months planning the murder of your wife, showing a level of premeditation that this court finds particularly disturbing. You corrupted your staff, exploiting their vulnerabilities to ensure their cooperation. You created elaborate financial schemes to hide your actions, showing sophisticated criminal intent." She paused, her gaze steel-hard as she continued. "Most troubling to this court is your complete lack of genuine remorse. Even now, your concern seems to be not for the woman you tried to murder, but for the fortune you didn't want to share. Your statement today shows that you still view your wife as property rather than a person." The sentence, when it came, drew gasps from the gallery. "For the charge of attempted first-degree murder, this court sentences you to 30 years in federal prison. For the charges of conspiracy, fraud, and financial crimes, an additional 20 years to be served consecutively. You will forfeit all assets gained through criminal activity and pay restitution as determined by this court." Prince slumped in his chair as the judge continued listing penalties and restrictions. His empire was being dismantled piece by piece, his assets frozen or seized, his name becoming synonymous with criminal hubris. After the sentencing, Marlowe met with the prosecution team one final time. Victoria Chen smiled as she handed over the final asset forfeiture documents. "The irony," Chen noted, "is that his obsessive documentation of everything actually made our job easier. He created perfect evidence of his own crimes." Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy reached new heights. Reporters broadcast live updates about the wealthy man who had lost everything because he couldn't bear to share it. Legal experts analyzed the severity of the sentence, while psychologists debated the pathology that had led to such an elaborate murder plot. In her new office, Marlowe began the process of redirecting seized assets into a foundation helping domestic abuse survivors. The fortune prince had tried to kill her for would now serve to protect others from men like him. The final footage of Prince August being led to the prison transport showed a broken man. The security cameras captured his last look at the world he'd lost, a world where he had once been king, now reduced to just another number in the federal prison system. Justice had been served, not just through the courts, but through the complete dismantling of everything Prince had valued above human life. Chapter 11. Redemption. 1 year after Prince August's sentencing, Marlowe stood in what had once been his executive office, now transformed into the headquarters of the Marlowe Bambi Foundation for Survivor Advocacy. Gone were the intimidating dark woods and leather that had once dominated the space. In their place, warm colors and comfortable furnishings created an atmosphere of safety and hope. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she watched the sunset paint the city skyline in shades of gold. The same view Prince had enjoyed while plotting her murder. Now it served as a backdrop for something far more powerful: survival and transformation. "Mrs. Bambi?" Her assistant's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Your 4 o'clock is here. Mrs. Catherine Reynolds." The woman who entered carried herself with the same careful poise Marlowe remembered from her own days as a trophy wife. Designer clothes, perfect makeup, all armor against the world. But her hands trembled slightly as she sat down. "My husband," Catherine began, then stopped, twisting her wedding ring. "The security systems in our home, I think he's using them to monitor you," Marlowe finished gently. "And recently, he's made changes to your insurance policies." Catherine's head snapped up, eyes wide. "How did you know?" Marlowe moved to sit beside her rather than across the desk. "Because men like our husbands follow patterns. They see technology as a weapon, money as power, and their wives as property to be controlled or disposed of." Opening her laptop, Marlowe showed Catherine what she'd already discovered. Insurance policies quietly tripled, electrical contractors hired through shell companies, staff members receiving mysterious payments. The same pattern Prince had used, now being repeated by another wealthy man who thought his money made him untouchable. "We can help you," Marlowe assured her. "But first, I want you to meet someone." Rafferty entered quietly, his presence as steady and reassuring as ever. He'd traded his gardening clothes for a security consultant's suit, but maintained the same humble strength that had helped save Marlowe's life. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said warmly, "let's talk about creating a safety plan." The next hours were spent building another escape strategy, another counterplan against another man's perfect crime. But this time, the potential victim wouldn't face it alone. Later that evening, Marlowe led a support group in the Foundation's main conference room. 10 women, each from wealthy backgrounds, each trapped in relationships where technology and money had become weapons of control. "The most dangerous time," Marlowe explained, "is when they realize they're losing control. That's why documentation is crucial. Everything my husband did to try to kill me became evidence to convict him. We can help you do the same." The Foundation's work had expanded beyond her initial vision. They didn't just help women escape. They taught them to fight back legally, to gather evidence, to turn their abusers' own systems against them. Maria, now the Foundation's outreach coordinator, entered with fresh coffee and an update. "The FBI's here about the Henderson case. 3 more women have come forward with similar stories." The Henderson case was following a familiar pattern. A wealthy man, multiple properties, sophisticated surveillance systems, and suspicious insurance policy changes. But this time, they'd caught it early. The potential victims were already being moved to safety, evidence was being gathered, and federal agents were building their case. In her private office later that night, Marlowe reviewed the day's cases on her secure server. Each file represented a life at risk, each one an opportunity to prevent what had almost happened to her. A notification popped up on her screen. Another woman seeking help through their encrypted website. The message was brief but clear. "My husband has installed cameras everywhere. Yesterday, I overheard him discussing insurance policies. Please help." Marlowe immediately began her standard background check, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Within minutes, she had confirmation. Another wealthy man, another pattern of control, another potential tragedy waiting to happen. The Foundation's security team, led by Rafferty, was already mobilizing. They had safe houses ready, legal teams on standby, and cyber experts prepared to document everything. What had once been Marlowe's personal survival strategy had become a well-oiled machine for saving others. A soft knock announced FBI Special Agent Rivera's arrival. "We've identified 3 more cases with patterns similar to Prince's," he reported. "Wealthy men using technology and financial control to isolate their wives, setting up what appear to be accident scenarios." Marlowe nodded, pulling up her secure files. "Send me the details. We'll start background checks immediately." The Foundation had become a crucial partner for law enforcement, their expertise in documenting domestic crimes proving invaluable. As midnight approached, Marlowe stood at her window again, watching the city lights twinkle below. In a federal prison hundreds of miles away, Prince August sat in his cell, his empire now funding the rescue of women from men just like him. Her phone buzzed with a message from Catherine Reynolds. "The safe house is perfect. For the first time in years, I slept through the night." Marlowe smiled, remembering her own first night of freedom. On her desk, files for 20 more cases awaited her attention. 20 more women seeking escape from gilded cages, 20 more chances to turn survival into strength. The security cameras in her office blinked their red lights steadily, but these ones served a different purpose. They didn't control or intimidate, they protected and preserved. Every woman who walked through their doors was recorded, documented, her story preserved as evidence of both tragedy and triumph. Prince's perfect crime had failed, but it had created something he never intended, a blueprint for saving others from men like him. His own tactics, turned against him, now served as a guide for detecting and documenting similar plots. The Foundation's work continued around the clock. In safe houses across the city, women slept peacefully, their children safe, their futures uncertain but free. Each one had a story. Similar to Marlowe's, each one fighting back against men who thought wealth meant power over life and death. Redemption, Marlowe had learned, wasn't just about surviving. It was about turning survival into purpose, pain into power, and tragedy into transformation. Every woman they saved was another victory, another piece of evidence that the strongest chains, wealth, power, control, could be broken. Chapter 12. New Beginnings. The ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and jasmine across the private beach as dawn broke over the horizon. Marlowe stood at her bedroom window in the beachfront villa, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. In 2 hours, she would marry Rafferty in a ceremony that represented everything her first marriage had lacked: truth, trust, and genuine love. Inside the federal penitentiary, Prince August awoke in his cell to find the morning's newspaper waiting. The headline screamed across the front page, "Phoenix rises, Marlowe Bambi weds Foundation partner." The accompanying photo showed Marlowe and Rafferty outside their Foundation's headquarters, both radiating quiet happiness. Prince's hands trembled as he read the article. His ex-wife's foundation had just received another major grant, expanding their work internationally. The fortune he'd tried to kill her to keep was now being used to help others escape men like him. The irony was exquisite in its completeness. Back at the beach villa, Marlowe prepared for her wedding. No designer dress this time. She wore an elegant but simple gown that spoke of authenticity rather than display. Her bouquet contained roses Rafferty had grown himself in their home garden, each bloom representing a milestone in their journey together. The guest list was small but significant. Victoria Chen, the prosecutor who had helped bring Prince down, FBI agents who now worked with the Foundation, survivors who had found freedom through their programs. Each person present represented a piece of their shared story of triumph over adversity. "Miss Bambi?" Maria knocked softly at the door. The former housekeeper, now the foundation's outreach director, had become a close friend. "It's almost time." The beach had been transformed into an intimate wedding venue. White chairs faced an arch made of driftwood and local flowers. The ocean provided a natural soundtrack, its waves keeping time like nature's own orchestra. In his prison cell, Prince watched the coverage on the small television he was allowed. News channels broadcast clips of guests arriving at the secured beach location. Each familiar face was a reminder of his downfall. The judge who had sentenced him, the FBI agents who had arrested him, the staff members who had testified against him. The ceremony began as the sun reached its peak. Rafferty waited at the arch, his quiet strength evident in his stance. When Marlowe appeared at the end of the sandy aisle, their eyes met with the understanding of two people who had faced darkness together and emerged stronger. Their vows were simple but profound. No flowery promises or elaborate declarations, just honest words spoken from hearts that had been tested by fire and found true. "I choose you," Marlowe said, her voice carrying clearly over the waves. "Not for wealth or status or power, but for the person you are, for your integrity, your strength, and your unwavering support." Rafferty's response was equally meaningful. "I promise to stand beside you, not behind or in front. To be your partner in all things, to face whatever comes together." In the prison's common area, Prince watched his ex-wife kiss her new husband. The other inmates had gone quiet, aware of the story playing out on the screen. The once powerful man who had tried to murder his wife rather than share his wealth now had nothing, while she had everything he had tried to destroy. The reception was held in the villa's garden, where Rafferty had created a paradise of blooming flowers and fragrant herbs. Guests mingled comfortably, their conversations a mix of personal and professional. Many were already discussing new initiatives for the foundation, turning even this celebration into an opportunity to help others. As evening approached, Marlowe and Rafferty shared their first dance under strings of soft lights. The song they chose spoke of rising from ashes, of finding strength in broken places. Around them, their chosen family celebrated not just their marriage, but the triumph of justice and the power of transformation. In his cell, Prince stared at the newspaper photo of his ex-wife's radiant smile. The article detailed how their foundation had just helped its 100th survivor escape an abusive situation. His own millions, seized as proceeds of criminal activity, were funding programs that dismantled the very systems of control he had tried to perfect. The wedding celebration continued into the night, but the media wasn't invited to the private moments. They didn't see Marlowe and Rafferty walking on the moonlit beach, discussing their plans for the foundation's future. They didn't capture the quiet conversations about new ways to help others find their strength. As the last guest departed, Marlowe stood with her new husband at the water's edge. The security cameras that had once been tools of control were now simply part of their protection system, managed with transparency and trust. "Ready to begin our next chapter?" Rafferty asked, his hand warm in hers. Marlowe smiled, thinking of how far they had come. From groundskeeper and trophy wife to partners in every sense, their journey had been unprecedented. "With you, always." In the federal penitentiary, Prince August turned off his television and returned to his cell. The guards would later report that they heard him crying, though he would deny it. His perfect world had crumbled, but from its ashes, something far more valuable had risen. The next morning's newspapers would carry photos of the happy couple departing for their honeymoon. But the real story wasn't in the pictures or headlines. It was in the quiet triumph of justice, in the transformation of pain into purpose, and in the power of choosing love over control. The security cameras blinked their red eyes steadily, now serving as silent guardians rather than tools of oppression. They recorded the final guests leaving, the cleanup crews arriving, the natural rhythm of life continuing. But most importantly, they captured the image of two people who had faced darkness and emerged into light, ready to help others find their way to freedom. Subscribe if you loved